In 1565, on a tiny Mediterranean island, something impossible happened. 500 knights and 6,000 civilians stood against 40,000 elite Ottoman soldiers. What came next would redefine the very limits of human endurance and military strategy. This isn't a legend, it's meticulously documented history. A 4-month siege where conventional warfare broke down and something entirely new was born. Where tactical innovation met desperate determination. Where sheer will to survive made the impossible a reality. By the end, 30,000 elite troops would flee from a mere 600 reinforcements, not because of numbers, but because of what Malta had become, a fortress that refused to break, no matter the cost. The winter of 1564 was thick with tension. Ottoman spies moved through Christian ports like shadows, gathering intelligence, counting defenses, and preparing for what would be the largest amphibious assault in history. Their target, Malta, a limestone island barely noticeable on a map, with scarce water, thin soil, and scorching summers. But it controlled the critical sea lanes between the Ottoman Empire and Christian Europe. Strategically, Malta was worth more than kingdoms. Defending this rock were the Knights of St. John, a military order displaced from Rhodes and Jerusalem. By 1565, they had established themselves here with just 500 combat-ready knights and local militia. Leading them was Jean de Valette, a 70-year-old veteran who spoke fluent Arabic from his time as a captive galley rower. He'd spent decades studying Ottoman tactics, an experience that would prove invaluable. Across the sea, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent planned Malta's conquest, not for revenge, but for strategic necessity. These knights were a constant disruption to Ottoman shipping, a thorn in the side of imperial authority. The Ottoman invasion force assembled through the winter. 200 ships, 40,000 soldiers, 80 massive siege cannons, and unprecedented amounts of gunpowder. At their head was Mustafa Pasha, a commander with an unbroken record of successful sieges. Ottoman intelligence was remarkably thorough. They knew Malta's fortifications. They knew the knights numbered only 500, and they knew the Maltese militia were mostly civilians. On paper, victory was a mathematical certainty. What no one anticipated was how desperation and innovation would transform this siege into something military historians still study today, a battle that would change European warfare for centuries. Spring of 1565 arrived with unusual cold. On May 18th, a fisherman raced into the city of Birgu with urgent news: the Ottoman fleet had arrived. The horizon was black with 200 ships. This wasn't just a fleet, it was an entire invasion force. 40,000 soldiers, including 6,000 janissaries who had never failed in a siege, against 500 knights and 6,000 civilians. The disadvantage was overwhelming. Yet Valette didn't evacuate. He prepared Fort St. Elmo, a star-shaped fortress, guarded the entrance to the Grand Harbour. Military engineers calculated it could withstand 4 days of concentrated assault. Valette needed it to hold for weeks. He deliberately reinforced a position that couldn't be held indefinitely. It wasn't a miscalculation, it was strategy. Every day St. Elmo survived was another day the main fortifications grew stronger. The Ottoman commanders looked at St. Elmo and made the same calculation. For days, maybe 5, they deployed their arsenal massive cannons, firing enormous stone projectiles, incendiary weapons, everything needed for a textbook siege. Inside St. Elmo, 1,500 defenders prepared. One of them wrote, "We are the delay that preserves Christendom." There was no drama in his words, just a clear understanding of their role. May 24th dawned with mist on cold stone. The first Ottoman cannon fired, then another. Within an hour, 7,000 cannonballs had smashed into St. Elmo. This intensity continued day after day. The limestone walls, designed for older warfare, crumbled under modern artillery. By midday, 3 large breaches were open. Standard doctrine called for an immediate assault. The Turks advanced, confident, but the defenders had filled the breaches with rubble, creating deadly obstacles. Janissaries pouring through the gaps met ferocious resistance. The assault stalled. Ottoman officers were stunned. These defenders weren't demoralized. They were adapting, improvising, creating defenses the Ottomans never anticipated. The siege was becoming a test of adaptation. The defenders even used psychological tactics to unnerve their attackers, methods that shocked forces accustomed to traditional warfare. 10 days in, a new player arrived, Dragut, one of the most experienced naval commanders in the Mediterranean. He brought 2,500 veteran soldiers and immediately recognized the defenders' sophistication. He ordered new tactics: underground mines to collapse the walls, incendiary weapons to create confusion, night attacks to exhaust the garrison. But St. Elmo had countermeasures. Every night, swimmers crossed the harbor carrying messages wrapped in waterproof material, requesting supplies and reinforcements. Remarkably, volunteers requested to be sent into the fortress, fully understanding the danger. June arrived, and with it, the heat. The stench of casualties became a problem. Turkish engineers finished their tunnels. A massive explosion collapsed a 30-foot section of the wall. Ottoman drums beat the advance. Janissaries poured through the breach. And then they met not just soldiers, but Maltese civilians. Women and the elderly were on the walls, pouring boiling liquids and dropping heavy objects. Elite soldiers trained for conventional war were facing total population mobilization. The psychological impact was immense. By June 22nd, St. Elmo had survived for 31 days. It had cost the Ottomans 8,000 casualties. Dragut himself was fatally wounded. Of the fort's 1,500 defenders, only about 100 were left standing. Villette sent a message: anyone who wished to evacuate could do so that night. The night's response became legendary. They sent back a simple message: we are soldiers of our order. We came to fulfill our duty. We shall remain. At dawn on June 23rd, the final assault began. Every Ottoman cannon fired at once. St. Elmo vanished in smoke and dust. The last 100 defenders prepared. Knights too injured to stand were carried to their posts, determined to fight from their chairs. As the Ottomans advanced, expecting little resistance, the wounded and incapacitated rose to fight one last time. By midday, St. Elmo fell. Every single defender was killed. But they had inflicted 8,000 Ottoman casualties. Surveying the ruins, Mustafa Pasha said, "If the outer fort cost so greatly, what will the main fortifications require?" The next morning, the defenders in the main city saw a horrific sight. The Ottomans had mounted the fallen knights on wooden crosses and floated them across the harbor. It was a clear message intended to break their spirit. Villette's response was calculated and brutal. He ordered captured Ottoman soldiers to the walls and had them executed in full view of the Ottoman lines. The message was unmistakable. There would be no mercy, no prisoner exchanges, no standard rules of war. Only total victory or total defeat. On August 7th, the grand assault began. 20,000 Ottomans attacked the main cities. They breached the walls in multiple places. Turkish banners appeared on the ramparts. Victory seemed imminent. Then, a figure in full armor charged into the thickest fighting. It was Jean de Villette himself, 70 years old, personally leading the counterattack. His presence electrified the defenders, but help also came from civilians. They dropped containers of boiling water and caustic materials on the attackers climbing the breaches. Young people threw stones. Priests fought with improvised weapons. It was total war. After 5 hours of brutal non-stop fighting, something unprecedented happened. Ottoman soldiers began refusing orders to advance. Elite Janissaries who had never retreated suddenly stopped. By late August, disease was rampant. The thousands of casualties in the summer heat created a sanitation nightmare. The defenders made it worse, deliberately contaminating water sources and using their own siege engines to launch diseased materials into the Ottoman camp. A Turkish soldier's diary survived. The defenders have created impossible conditions. Soldiers perish from disease at alarming rates. This campaign has become untenable. Morale plummeted. On September 7th, dust clouds appeared on the horizon. The Spanish relief force from Sicily had finally arrived, but it was a small force, only 8,000 soldiers, many of them inexperienced. Yet Ottoman intelligence reports, fueled by fear and exhaustion, exaggerated the numbers. The Spanish commander cleverly landed only 600 men at first, but had them advance with drums, banners, and kicking up as much dust as possible. Mustafa Pasha's scouts, fatigued and anxious, reported that a massive Spanish army was approaching. What followed wasn't an organized retreat, it was a panicked evacuation. 30,000 exhausted soldiers fled from the site of 600. Strategic mathematics had become irrelevant. By September 11th, the last Ottoman ship was gone. The results were staggering. The Ottomans had lost 30,000 men. The Knights had lost 250 of their 500. 5,000 Maltese civilians were dead. The psychological impact echoed across Europe. Church bells rang from London to Vienna. The unstoppable Ottoman Empire had been halted by a small band of knights and civilians. The siege proved that a smaller force could defeat a larger one through innovation, adaptation, and psychological resilience. Modern military psychological operations trace their roots back to Malta, create conditions so unbearable that the enemy fears fighting more than they fear retreating. The knights and the people of Malta survived because they adapted better under extreme pressure. Today, visitors walk the peaceful streets of Malta, largely unaware of the history beneath their feet. But every military academy in the world still studies this siege. The Great Siege of Malta wasn't just a military victory. It was the moment warfare changed forever. It showed us what humans are capable of when pushed to their absolute limits. If this story fascinated you, consider subscribing to our channel, Flow of History. We explore the pivotal moments that shaped our world and reveal the timeless lessons they hold. Thanks for watching.